Hi, everybody. So this is a class on one of my very favorite books, the great Zen Master Sosan Hyujong's book, Mirror of Zen. This book has accompanied me on just about every solo retreat I've done. I have no idea how many times I've read it, 20, 30, 40, I don't know, because when I do a long solo retreat, I just read it. And then the other book I read is Fundamental Wisdom of the Middle Way, translated by J. Garfield, which is by Nagarjuna. And I just read them over and over and over until the retreat is finished, on my breaks. So it's an amazing book. It is still used actively in Sun training. Sun is the Korean pronunciation of Chan. Zen is the Japanese pronunciation. So in Sun training in Korea, if you want to become a monk or a nun in Korea, you will become intimately familiar with this text. So let me say a little bit about Sosan, whose monk's name is Hyujong, and that's how he's usually referred to in contemporary scholarship. So from the late 14th to the late 16th century, so Korea was a Buddhist, you can't really say country because it was a collection of kingdoms, but it was a Buddhist place until about the late 14th century. And then between the late 14th century and the late 16th century, there was severe repression of Buddhism. Then there would be restoration of Buddhism, then severe repression, then restoration. And finally, at the end of the 16th century, there was a severe repression which continued for 300 years. Kyung Ho became a monk during a time of severe repression. Kyung Ho is our great-great-great-grandfather. And the reason was that the government and the bureaucracy was sort of allegiant to Confucianism, into principles of Confucianism. The entire educational system was a Confucian educational system, much as in China. And the Confucians did not particularly like Buddhism. And so there were these times of incredible repression. And then you'd have someone in power who liked Buddhism, and then they'd come back. And so this happened. And it was so severe that there's actually a gap in our transmission lineage in the late 15th century, which Sosan, not in this text, but in someplace, he actually refers to this. Korea was run essentially by a bureaucratic deep state. And the way you got into the bureaucracy was you did well on your exams, which were based on Confucian culture. But it was subject to the political whims of the aristocracy. So on the one hand, you had the bureaucrats, and on the other hand, you had the aristocracy. And the late 14th to late 16th century was a time of great political ferment. So this is the atmosphere into which Hyujong was born. His grandfather was a very, very high bureaucrat, and of course, if you stick your nose out, it can be cut off. His grandfather is a high bureaucrat who was exiled to Anju during some political shift, and that's where Hyujong was born in 1520. His father was a low-level bureaucrat who did not receive a salary, was dependent on a patron. So that gives you an idea of what the culture is like. You're relying on this guy to give your family a home and give them food and give them clothing and give you money and, everything like that. Actually, he would just give money and they'd buy their own food and clothing. So he was a low-level bureaucrat depending on a patron, but the family was comfortable, and in particular, the children, there were 4 of them. Hyujong was the youngest by far, had an excellent education in a Confucian system. He was very precocious. His mother died when he was 9. His father died when he was 10. And he had a stupa built in their memory, and he went through the 3 years of formal mourning. And this is a kid, right? 9, 10 years old. He's doing this very correct sort of style stuff. And this caught the eye of a local high official who basically took him in when he was 12 and then sent him to a very high-class Confucian academy in a more central part of the country. He did very well in school, but he also partied hard, and therefore he flunked his exams, which was, again, remember, everything's dependent on how you do in the exams. We think the SAT and the ACT are problematic. This was much worse. But he continued studying with private teachers because he was a smart guy and he wanted to learn. When he was a young man, he traveled quite a bit around the country, and while he was doing this, he met a monk. And this monk, a Buddhist monk, who introduced him to Buddhism via texts. Read this sutra, read this shastra, which is a commentary on the sutra. Read these commentaries, read these sutras. And oh, by the way, here are some Kongan texts. So they were Kongan texts that were circulating, much like the Blue Cliff Record, the Mumonquan, the thing we always read, 365 Kongans. You had a Kongan, you had commentary, you had poems, things like that. Questions were actually not included in these things. But anyway, so he had these sutras, these shastras, and these Kongan texts to read. And he became very interested in Sun Buddhism. He became very interested in the Kongans. And he turned to Buddhism, and he focused on Sun. And he became a monk, and his monk's name, as I said, is Hyujong. Sosan, the way he's usually referred to in the texts, as a writer, Sosan is his mountain name. So San means mountain, so he was on the So mountain for much of his life, and so he's Sosan. And he became a monk during a period of persecution, but it was just before Queen, do I have her name here? Yeah, Dowager Queen Munjong was a very devout Buddhist, and she restored Buddhism very soon after he became a monk. And she was under her guidance, they restored the monks' exams. So the monks' exams, remember how important exams are. The monks' exams had been done away with completely. So they restored them, and in 1552, he was one of the first of the monks to pass the monks' exams during this restoration. And almost immediately, he must have been a very talented guy, because almost immediately he became a very high-level administrator. And he became an administrator, so there was Kyo, that's the Sutra school, and there was Sun, that's the what we call Zen. And he became a high administrator in both schools. And after 5 years, he quit. He decided what he wanted to do is practice and teach. And so he traveled all over Korea, south, north, east, west. He traveled all over Korea studying and practicing Buddhism. He was not an isolated figure. He had long-standing, they didn't have Zoom, they didn't have phones, they didn't have airplanes, but they had personal relationships through letters. And he was good corresponding friends with leading Confucian scholars and leading bureaucrats. So even though he was a Buddhist monk, he was not detached from the sort of other kinds of ways of thinking and ways of doing things. And he was not detached from sort of Korean politics, Korean functioning. He was not detached from that. In fact, he was accused of plotting against the king during an attempted insurrection, but then the king saw how pious he was and everything like that and decided nope, and he was released. Then in 1592, after the final suppression had happened, the suppression that was going to last 300 years, the Japanese invaded Korea. And the Korean army was a mess because Korean politics was a mess because nobody was running things. They were just fighting with each other. The army was a mess. The Japanese, I think it took them like 3 weeks or something to conquer the capital, which was not Seoul. And they just advanced very, very quickly. So you need to raise an army. Let's see. where can we find a whole bunch of men to be in an army? Oh, they're these Buddhist monks, right? So first, Hyujong's, one of his students raised an army of 500 monks. That was fairly successful, but it wasn't enough. And so the king asked Hyujong to raise a much bigger army. He raised over 5,000 monk army, which was huge for the time. And he actually was the head of it. And now at this point, he was in his 70s. He was like 72 or 73 at the time. So he found himself the head of this monk's army. And they were very, very successful. It took them a long time to kick out the Japanese, but they stopped the expansion of Japanese, and then they slowly pushed them back. But after a year, Hyujong said, look, I'm an old man. I don't want to be a soldier. I will support you in any way I can, but I'm going back. So he went back to teaching and practicing. And but he was still connected. He was part of one of the peace negotiators in 1602, which was finally when the Japanese left, and he died in 1604. And he has this very strange death poem, that is something he wrote a few hours before he died. Supposedly he knew he was going to die. He wrote this poem, and then he sat there, and then he died, and the poem is 80 years, and supposedly he's looking at a portrait of himself. 80 years ago, you were me. 80 years later, I am you, which is strange because it would have to be a portrait of himself as a 4-year-old. So it doesn't quite compute. But anyway, that's the story. He had over 1,000 students and over 70 were monks. And I want to stop for a second. That means he had a lot of lay students. Okay? And he was a somewhat prolific writer, and his writings are a backbone of Korean Sun. And after he died, even though the Confucians were in the ascendancy, he was greatly, greatly honored. So that's sort of roughly Sosan Hyujong, his life. The Mirror of Zen, the book we're looking at, was written in Chinese, and my notes say, of course, because Chinese was to Buddhism, was to East Asian Buddhism, what Latin was to Roman Catholicism. It was the language of the religion. And all of the early Buddhist writings until in East Asia, until really maybe a couple of hundred years ago, were written in Chinese. But it was immediately translated into contemporary Korean, that is contemporary in the 16th century, which is very different from our contemporary Korean. It's sort of like, trying to read one that Aprilla with, what is it? One that Aprilla with her shower is Sawda. What book is that? I'm forgetting. Oh, come on. Chaucer. It's like reading Chaucer. It doesn't, not an easy read. And the Korean version, the 16th century Korean version, was published first, before the Chinese version. And then Sosan looked at it, he noticed how people were talking about it, how they were studying it, and he said, oh, this is too complicated. So he shortened it, again in Chinese, again translated into 16th century Korean. And it is that version that we are looking at. So the versions are, this is, I only have a clip. I don't have it bound. This is translated by Mark Mueller. This is my favorite of the three. Well, actually, I know of four. This is my favorite. Mark Mueller did this for the Choge order. I do not know how it's available except as a PDF. And then Kathy Park, who is Korean, she's a teacher in our school, and she is Korean. And I looked at the text and we said there's some sort of infelicities. And so we made a few minor changes. And that's the version that I posted. It's Mark Mueller's version with a few minor changes by me and Kathy. And we explain what the changes are at the end so you know exactly what's going on. The most accessible one is published by Shambhala, and it's The Mirror of Zen, and it says the author is Bopjang. But Bopjang is a 20th century Korean master who translated the medieval Korean into contemporary Korean. So who translated into English was the American monk Hyujong, who now lives in Europe. So it says Bupjang, but it really should say Hyungak because he's the guy who put it into English. Bupjang was sort of the intermediary. But anyway, so that's very accessible. However, it's somewhat problematic. It kind of, it's not as faithful to the source. It's sort of, it's like some translations say of Rumi or something where you sort of, without realizing it, you kind of shift it a little bit. It's not quite as faithful. But, Sosan's one of these people who, Sappho. You can't wreck a translation of Sappho. You really can't wreck a translation of Sosan. So if you have a friend and they can't access Mueller's text, although if they're your friend, you can always send them the URL, you can recommend this. This one, which Liz heroically got, this is John Jorgensen. This is published by University of Hawaii Korean Classics Library. John Jorgensen is an amazing, amazing, amazing scholar of Korean Buddhism. And this is called, he translates the title as A Handbook of Korean Zen Practice. Howsoever, it is incredibly dense, as Liz said. And we'll see, I'm going to look at the first line, the first section very carefully and compare. Let me read Mueller's. Oh, yeah, there's this thing, I have to say, first of all, there's this thing where the Mirror of Zen or Handbook of Zen Practice is presented as text. Each section is text, commentary, and possibly verse, and possibly other commentary on the commentary. And Hyungak makes the claim that the text is from some kind of Buddhist source and everything else is Sosan. This is not true, and I'll explain in a minute. Well, actually, I think I'll go right now to, no, I'll wait. So let me read the first line in Mueller, the text part. So the text part is, there is only one thing from the very beginning, luminous and mysterious. It was never born and never dies. It cannot be described or given a name. And if that doesn't make you sit up and want to practice, I don't know what will. Okay, and then Hyungak is fairly close to that. There is only one thing from the very beginning, infinitely bright and mysterious by nature. It was never born and it never dies. It cannot be described or given a name. Again, makes you want to sit up and practice. Jorgensen. There is one thing here that from its origin has been very bright and very numinous, never born and never extinguished, that cannot be named and cannot be described. Not quite the same. Okay. But Jorgensen is this amazing scholar, and now I have to explain how this text really works. And first I want to be about to share something. Yeah. So the way the text actually works, now there are 86 sections. And Sosan, in his introduction, says something like, I have 100 quotations or 100 sources or something like that, which makes you realize that the structure of the text part is a quotation and then nothing else is. That can't possibly be true because we have more sources than we have sections. So, how does Mirror of Zen actually work? Whoops, wrong one, stop this share. Okay, share just one at a time, Judy. Here we go. Wait a minute. I don't want to share this. I want to share just this. It's going to the, okay, that's the one. Why is it doing that? I'll just have to read it. This is terrible. Oh, you know what I'll do? I will get rid of this. Oh, okay. Excuse me, I have to get out of share and I have to do a little thing here. So basically, meanwhile, I'll be talking and explaining things. So what's going on is that the entire text is a collage. And I actually have an article in now defunct Buddha Dharma, but you can find it in Lion's Roar, called There Is No Author, something like that. And I talk about this, that the way you wrote a Buddhist text it was not, oh, I am so original, these are my ideas, I am so wonderful. Instead, you completely absorbed the tradition. You absorbed the tradition. And then this tradition sort of reconstituted itself in you. And that's what the text was. This text was your absorption of the Buddhist heritage and coming out through you. And so collage was, in some sense, a very common technique. And here is how it works. Okay. So I'm just going to take the very first two lines. There is only one thing here, that from its origin has been very bright and very numinous, never born and never extinguished, that cannot be named and cannot be described. So here are Jorgensen's notes. One thing, possibly in reference here to the verse of Huineng in the Zhangbao and Day versions of the Platform Sutra, Bodhi originally has no tree, the clean mirror also has no stand. Originally there was not one thing, so where can there be any dust? It is a reversal of Maju Daoi's here I do not even have one thing in reply to Huai Hai. And the first 5 characters translated as here start the preface by Kiwa explanations of 5 interpretations of the Diamond Sutra. So already that one thing, we have 3 references to Buddhist literature. Then very bright and very numinous comes from the instructions in the assembly, instructions to the assembly in the Linji record, and then Jorgensen gives various other English translations. Can it be named and can it be described refers to a passage in the extensive record of Yunmen. Yunmen raised the words of Dangshan, you must know there is a matter that improves on the Buddha. A monk asked, what is the matter that improves on the Buddha? Dangshan said, not the Buddha. The master, Yunmen, said, it cannot be named and cannot be described, which is why he said, not the Buddha. And then Jorgensen goes on to say, described is, and then he transliterates the sign in Korean. So described is to be given form or to describe a form. So boom, we're unpacking a whole lot of stuff here. And this applies not just to the text parts, it applies to the commentaries. The poems, I think most of them are entirely lifted from previous sources, which the reader of the time would be expected to know, right? Just like we're expected to know certain popular songs. If someone makes a reference to certain popular songs, depending on what generation you are, you might or might not know what the reference is. So that's what's going on here. It's a very complex melding from many, many sources coming together. So, let me see. At this point, I think it would be nice to stop and ask if there are any questions. Okay. So.
Actually, Judy, I do have one question.
Sure.
Yeah, so would you consider the Jorgensen translation is probably, would you consider that more linguistically accurate? Or do you?
I don't think it's more linguistically accurate. I think I have tremendous respect for John
Mhm.
Jorgensen, but when you translate, there's a tendency, if you're not thinking in a literary way, if you're
Mhm.
not thinking of sort of how language moves and you're thinking of meaning only, so this is something scholars do often, you tend to translate the meaning and you don't get you translated the meaning literally, and that doesn't translate actually into the way the language you're translating to works. My husband's a professional translator. He can
Mhm.
talk about this for hours. So you have to, if you're entirely accurate, you end up being completely inaccurate because you can't make this shift from one language system to another language system. And that essentially is what Jorgensen is doing. He's not presenting this as a literary translation.
Mhm.
He's presenting each thing and then commentary, small thing, commentary, small thing, commentary. And the commentary overwhelms, absolutely overwhelms the, in lengthwise. And then, in addition, he has footnotes. And the footnotes can be quite long. They can be like, half a page. So this is really a commentary on the text, a sort
Okay.
of snippet by snippet commentary on the text is what he's doing. And it's an amazing tour de force. I have such respect for what he's done. If you want to like study Mirror of Zen as opposed to be inspired by it. If you want to study it, you've got to go to Jorgensen. It's the only way to do it. If you want to be inspired by it, you don't need to do that. So, and yeah, it's very dense, and as I said, it's really amazing, but it's very much
Mhm.
Kyo and not Sun.
Yeah.
Okay?
All right. Thank you.
Yes, Charlie.
Something that kind of struck me in Hyung Gaksunem's preface to the book that he translated, or his
Mhm.
translation, because he emphasizes staying true to the text, and you're taking issue with some of the things that he.
Yes, I am.
Okay.
He's working from the contemporary Korean. He's not working from the Chinese. He's not working from the medieval Korean. He's translating a contemporary Korean text from contemporary Korean.
Yeah,
So
he says he's
there's
not
he
Chinese.
he's the he did it, and he says somewhere else that it's from the Korean, yeah, from the contemporary Korean. That's why they put Book Jung as the author, exactly for that reason. Liz?
I would, and it's, I don't know so much as it's a question, but it seemed to me on the Jorgensen one, it's almost like what he's doing. I don't know which one I read because I read so many of them. I read three. I only read three, not so many. But I thought that in Sosang's introduction, he was like, there's all this information out there.
Mm-hmm.
And you can get too bogged down by reading.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is my interpretation of
Yes,
what he
that's a
said.
very good interpretation.
And you can get so bogged down in it.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm going to do for you is
Cliff's Notes.
condense it. Yes, I'm going to give you a cliff reader of it, and you don't even have to worry about
That's right. That's exactly
all
right.
the other stuff.
That's right.
And so it was, and then Jorgensen is like, well, if you're really curious about where all the stuff came from,
Mm-hmm.
then,
Mm-hmm.
but it seemed to bog me down
Yeah.
on the
Jorgensen is
on
not
the
Jorgensen is not giving you a text that you can read and say this is the mirror of Zen. Jorgensen is giving you very, very wonderful commentary on exactly what you're saying on the source material. And that's exactly what he's doing. And he does not mean his book to be something that you take on a solo retreat for
right.
inspiration. It is not meant for that. It's meant for, do you want to know where this text comes from, what its origin is, what it's referring to, all the sources. He's giving you that. And what I find really helpful with Jorgensen is cutting through the idea that Sosan wrote this as an individual author. You're right. Sosan himself says, I am doing this as a kind of Cliff Notes. There's too much stuff out there. This is what you really need to know. But you can do that kind of thing without having the kind of collage stuff that Sosan is doing. And I think it's very important because, you know, in contemporary weird, civilization, what is Western educated? I forget what the other things are. No, white educate. I don't know. Anyway, whatever it is, weird. Weird culture. Individualism is very important, and I think it's the notion that Sosan is writing from the tradition and not like a hack. So you can have people like Cliff's Notes. That's a hack. They're not absorbing it and then giving you something wonderful. They're just hacking their way through it. But this is this kind of absorption and combination and recombination, and it's just an amazing thing to me, the process by which this was written. And I think it's important to mention that. So that's why, and I think Jorgensen is very helpful in making that process transparent. So.
And I wonder, and I know you don't know what Sosan would necessarily do, but I find myself as I would read it, and then I would go back to just reading it, thinking, well, I wonder where does that come from? And I had a sense that I mean, Sosan didn't speak to me or anything, but I had a sense that if you were to ask him that as his student, he would say, "Don't worry about it, just read it and sit."
Yes, I think that's correct.
Okay.
But I mean, I don't know either, but I think that is very correct. On the other hand, a lot of what we can't trace would have been in that culture. Like some of the poems, it's very clear that he was presenting them because they are something that people would have known. Just like if you want to talk about getting to the other shore, and we would say, row, row, row your boat, and we'd know what that reference was. So it's very clear that a lot of this stuff is also like that. He makes references to a lot of folk tales. Like the prostitute who seduces, is it Ananda, and then Manjushri saves them both, or I'm forgetting the details, but yeah, he's the guy who stabbed himself in the leg or something like that. He's referring to these folk tales that everyone knows. We don't know. We need footnotes to tell us, but he knows, and everyone else around him knows. So yeah. Anything else right now? Yes, Wenda.
So it
Wenda.
sounds like,
I,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Wenda.
I would just like to hear, after you've read this so many times, what is the main, or just some of the inspiration that you
That's what
that
I'm
you
going to
find
get
so
to.
amazing?
That's what I'm going to get to. That's the next part.
Okay.
Okay. Jenny.
Oh, sorry, I was just gonna say that it sounds like Sosan was like a DJ, sampling the music of his time, right?
That's a good way to put it. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Hip hop. Yeah. Yeah. In fact, when I wrote this article for Shambhala, not Shambhala, for Buddha Dharma, I actually referred to a particular hip hop song of Kendrick Lamar that had been deconstructed in some magazine article that I read, and I said, "This is what Sosan is doing." Exactly. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So let me sort of talk about the structure of the text, and there are many ways of breaking down the structure of the text. Like I'm doing it differently from Jorgensen. I'm sure Mueller would do it differently. Many ways of doing it differently. So the first four sections are really focused on the absolute. We have the one thing that cannot be described or given a name. We have the Buddhas and the ancestors not being necessary. Then we have a sort of sidetrack, but we need expedient teachings and teachers. And then we come back to thoughts distort, names distract. And this notion of language and thinking obscuring our knowledge of the world is very important in Son, in Zen, in Chan, and it comes throughout this text. Then we have 4 sections which sort of compare or balance Son versus Kyo. So section 5, Son is mind-to-mind transmission, Kyo is sutras, Zen is deep, Son is deep, Kyo is shallow. 7, no attachments, mind's nature is enlightened intrinsically, and then Kyo transmits the idea of one mind, but so transmits seeing one's own nature. And then he says, don't make shallow and profound, which he's just been doing, okay? Then we go back to the absolute. The dharmas are empty, cut off all thinking, that's 9. Wipe away all teachings, and one mind directly appears, and he cites the pine tree in the garden koan. Sutras are preliminary, they're needed for most, but not everyone. First sudden enlightenment, then gradual cultivation. And this comes from Chinul. This is one of the hallmarks of Korean Son as compared to Japanese Zen is, in Soto Zen, there's gradual cultivation. In Rinzai Zen, there's sudden enlightenment. In Korean Son, there's awakening, and then you have to cultivate that further. You're not done. So that's very important. And he talks about the Wadu. And then number 12, he talks about live words, not dead words. And then 13 through 18, he talks about Wadu practice. He has metaphors, the hen hatching the egg, the baby wanting the mother, necessity of sincerity. He talks about great faith, great determination, great doubt. Those are the 3 legs. This is very classic, the 3 legs of the stool. In number 15, he talks about the Mu Kangan, the necessity of doubt, frustration, and renunciation. In 16, he gives more instructions on Wadu practice. He talks about the rat in the horn. So a rat trap, they take a big horn, a horn with a big, opening, put a bait in the inside, the rat would crawl in, it would get stuck, couldn't back out. So, and then 10 Wadu diseases. 17, he has the metaphor of the mosquito biting an iron ox. These are incredibly classic. And then 18, the heart metaphor, not too tight and not too loose. Again, very classic. I should say something about the difference between Wadu and Kangans. It's not clear at the time of Sosan whether there was the kind of differentiation that we have now. So now the way we think of it, the Kangan is the great question, like, what am I? What is this? A great question that you carry with you for life. You just, the knife cuts through butter, but the butter is infinite. And you just sort of ride the Wadu, and just you're dispelling your delusions, just cutting through. So that's the Wadu. And I know I do Wadu practice. I don't know how many other people on the screen do. So Wadu practice is just, what am I? And just, what am I? And then my teacher taught a variant of that, in-breath, what am I? Out-breath, don't know, very strong. He was, what am I? Don't know! Because he had this great Korean accent. So this Wadu, and other things can be Wadu. Like for a while I had this Wadu of mind comes from where? It just hit me. Where does mind come from? So mind comes from where was my Wadu? So Wadu is this great question. You don't bring it to a teacher and ask to be approved of it. Whereas Kangan is a question that comes not from you. It comes from the teacher. And you are expected to give a response. And hopefully the response will be approved. And then you go to another Kangan. So there's a big difference now between Wadu and Kangan. The instructions that Sosan is given for Kangans and Wadus are sort of the same. And he sort of uses the words, not quite, but almost interchangeably. So it's not clear whether the distinction is made that is now. But anyway, that's now we're through 18. 19 through 29 are inspiration to practice. There's a lot of stuff about demons. There's a lot of stuff about strong practice and the necessity of questions and doubt. And he has he has this wonderful thing. Let's see, where is this? Number 20. Whoops, that's not the one I want. It's the quotes. Where are the quotes? Okay, excuse me, I have to find my little thing here. Yeah. So, yeah, you who practice Zen, do you know the weight of the four debts? Are you aware that this coarse body composed of the four elements is decaying with each conscious moment? Are you aware that human life rests on a single breath? One must carefully consider and ponder each thing so that one does not fool oneself. Now, if that's not going to make you wake up and dedicate your life to practice, I don't know what will. So, all this, words should be rooted in actions. Cut through thinking, become free from life and death. Don't fool yourself. If you say, I am awakened, you have to, find a clear-eyed master to check you. He says the fine flavor of refined milk may turn out to be poison. Correct view and sudden awakening is primary. Correct action and behavior comes from this. Now, this is very important because in other Buddhist monastic traditions, you work very hard on your deportment, on your behavior, on your actions, how you bow, how you, light incense, how you handle your chopsticks, whatever it is. You work very hard on that, and that is supposed to bring about awakening. And he's saying it's awakening that's primary. He talks about the pitfalls of Kyo and of Zen. They both have, and of Son, they both have pitfalls. He talks about diluted practice, and he says the key to practice is do not be attached. So that's a very fast summary. So this whole, it's 11 sections on practice. And then he has sections on the absolute versus relative, and that's 30 through 37. He talks about you don't discard the mind, you don't defile self-nature. To search for a correct dharma is mistaken. So that's interesting. Don't throw away, don't seek. He talks about the two vehicles, by which he means the Theravada, is about elimination of defilements, and great nirvana is non-arising of defilements. But elimination involves both a subject and an object, but non-arising lacks both subject and object. So that elimination of defilements is just, you're on the wrong track. You have to reflect clearly. Arising of thought is non-arising. So that's very interesting. So defilements arise from the one mind. So why cut them off? So mind is like our true nature, right? Defilements arise from the one mind. Why cut them off? No thought arising equals no ignorance. Understand appearances are a mirage, and you drop this, and you drop appearances, drop this and you awaken. There's no need for gradual awaken. The magician metaphor, which is again very common, you can find that in Nagarjuna. Also the flowers in the sky metaphor, that's also in Nagarjuna. Nagarjuna is much older, 2nd century India. So then our origin is non-arising, we abide in non-arising, yet we perceive birth, death like flowers appearing in the sky. We perceive nirvana like flowers disappearing in the sky. So he's saying, don't get caught in these dualities. Don't get caught in birth and death, arising and non-arising. He talks about bodhisattvas or saved sentient beings, but there are no sentient beings to save. This was like the second section. Thoughts are intrinsically empty. This in itself saves sentient beings. And then he has this interesting line, the above discussion deals with faith and understanding. And then in the absolute awakening is sudden, and the relative karma takes time to eradicate. And again, this is straight Chinul. This is just straight Chinul. And then there's, let's see, another 12 sections on precepts and virtues. So if you break precepts, that's putting you on the path of demons. So the importance of Shila, Samadhi, and Prajna. Shila, precepts, Samadhi, awakening, and Prajna, wisdom. And then Beware of people without virtue, without precepts, there's no chance of a decent rebirth. He's talking a lot about rebirth. It's in his culture, he's talking about it. To transcend life and death, cut off desires and lust. 42, all uninstructed pure wisdom arises through samadhi. Okay? When mind is in samadhi, this is 43, one perceives all of the transient characteristics of the world, and then he has this poem in the commentary, fine specks of dust dance in sunlight falling through a crack, reflections vividly appear in a clear pool of water. So this is the world, specks of dust dancing in sunlight falling through a crack, reflections appearing in a clear pool of water. So it's an acceptance of the transient characteristics of the world. More about arising, non-arising, liberation, no cultivation, mind is originally quiescent. Then 46, the importance of giving. And then 47, no anger or hatred, maintain a not moving mind. 48, the importance of patience and compassion. And 49, the importance of effort. And then 50 through 55 is mantras and chanting, and he talks about sutras, which you need to understand. In monastic training, sutras are chanted. In early monastic training, the first years of monastic training, you don't study the sutras, you chant the sutras. So that's why that belongs there. So mantras help eradicate karma from previous lives, make ignorance surrender. A very, very long section on chanting. And then what he's doing, so it was Kyo and Sun, but also Pure Land is in there. And this emphasis on chanting, you chant to Amida Buddha, to be reborn in the Pure Land, and where you can really practice, and this sort of other power. So a very long sentiment on chanting, and what he's doing is, this is in response to the Pure Land practice around him, and so he talks about how if you chant with a clear mind, then this is every bit as good as meditation. And then he says, the worthies in the above passages all directly point to the original mind. There is no other method. This holds true at the level of ultimate reality. So, okay, Sun is superior. However, in the phenomenal realm, paradise and Amida Buddha with his 48 vows really exist. So that's very interesting. And he includes a distinction between our Buddha nature and our actions. 53, the importance of sutras to awaken affinity for Dharma. But 54, sutras alone are not enough. And 55, fancy talk, not based on awakening, like scholastic arguments about what the sutras say or don't say, is, quote, like decorating an outhouse. By the way, in traditional Korean temples, well, I'll tell you a story. So the Zen Master Subang-sun, who was a monk and a Zen master in our school, died very suddenly at the age of 52 from a heart attack. He was in Korea visiting temples, and there was this small, very beautiful building that he saw, and he really wanted to check it out, and his host said, no, you really don't want to check it out. And he took photos of it. He thought it must be a hermitage. It was an outhouse. And he gave them, this was, before we had computers, he gave them his host, he gave them his film to develop. And when he got the pictures back, those pictures weren't there. So they did decorate outhouses. Anyway, then there's a lot of sections on being a monk. My God, that goes from 56 to 71. And it's all about your responsibility as a monk. People are giving you things. You're responsible. You're responsible for, practicing hard because these people gave you something. You don't seek fame and fortune. You don't try to impress people. You don't waste what you're given. Do not receive offerings if you're not sincere. Quote, better to enclose one's body with hot irons, better to drink iron water, better to jump into a molten pot than to accept offerings if you're not sincere. And, losing human life after being a monk is worse than previously being born in 3 lower realms. If you do not make your mind clear during this lifetime, you will find it difficult to digest even 1 drop of water. Is that familiar to people who've been on retreats and heard the temple rules? That's in the temple rules, right? Okay. Importance of repentance and shame. And then he says, but the mind is fundamentally empty and quiescent. There is nowhere for unwholesome karma to attach itself. So on one side, yes, you should feel repentance. Yes, you should feel shame when appropriate. But on the other hand, the mind is fundamentally empty and quiescent. There is nowhere for unwholesome karma to attach itself. So in the relative, and then he goes to the absolute. He reminds us, yes, the relative is important. You need to act correctly. But there's this absolute, which is not distinct from the relative, which is the source, okay? Importance of simplicity and honor and honesty. The ordinary person, this is another quote, grasps objects. The person of the way grasps the mind. But the true Dharma is to forget both mind and objects. So he constantly does this shift, where you're talking about what you have to do in this world, and then he's reminding us of the source. I want to make a sort of comment because Wenda asked, how does this affect me reading this? If we read it, we say, well, we're lay people. It doesn't have anything to do with us. It's all about being a monk. No. Okay, so people give monks food and they give monks clothing, and they give monks, a place to live. They, give money to build the temple and stuff like that. But this universe gives us air, gives us water, gives us food. Our society gives us shelter, those of us who are lucky to have it. We are constantly, receiving, not from lay people because we're monks, but we're constantly receiving from this universe. We have the same responsibility that the monks have. So when I read this, when I read that monks, this is not a quote, there's a summary, monks bear a grave responsibility to be worthy of the support they are given. We bear a grave responsibility to be worthy of the support the universe gives us. So I don't read this as a kind of thing that's alien to me. I read it as something directed at me, even though formally it's not. Anyway, the next 5 sections are about avoiding demons and facing death. So he talks about like having a very calm, quiet mind, and he's saying, nope, that invites the demons in. If you completely attain that self-nature is intrinsically empty and quiescent, then there are no tracks for demons to see. Importance of knowing when you're dying, importance of making no distinctions when dying. And then he cites an 11th century master who says, it doesn't really matter. And then the importance of not falling into nihilism. Okay? I want to talk a little about demons, because demons are in this text a lot. You can think of demons as external. And I'm sure that many of the people reading this text, and maybe even to some extent Sosan, thought of them as external. But you can also think of demons as arising from your own karma, your own mind. You make these demons. They have no intrinsic existence. You are making them. And that means they can dissolve. I like the terminology of demons because if you talk about someone's, if you talk about someone's anxiety or someone's fear or someone's anger, it sounds as if that anxiety and that fear and that anger are intrinsic to this person, that they're part of what this person is, whatever is means. But if you think of them as demons, then that means that they have a certain kind of externality, that they're not something you're stuck with. It's not, I am anxious. It's like, I am experiencing anxiety. And if you want to call it the demon of anxiety, go ahead and do it. So it becomes something that's not personal, not something that you own, but something that has appeared, which means it can disappear. So I really like all this language about demons because it kind of points to our not being stuck in the suffering that we cause ourselves. That it's not intrinsic to who we are. So that's just what I want to say about demons. Anyway, then the next 8 sections or 9 sections, he talks about particular Zen masters and their pitfalls. Then he talks about the importance of the demonstration, avoidance of theoretical explanations. This is Zen lineage techniques. He talks about Matsu's shout and the origin of Linji school from Matsu's shout. And then he talks about, he gives names for the 5 lineages, and then the 5 traditional lineages, of which only 2 were active in his time. And then he gives an homage to Linji and Deshan. Yet if we were to speak the truth, these 2 teachers are actually nothing more than mere phantoms, which is actually a high compliment. And then finally in 85 he returns to the 2nd section, don't cling to the Buddhas and the ancestors. Quote, all searching is suffering, it is better to do nothing. So this reflects back on section 2. And then in 86, quote, the sacred brilliance is not dark, it is shown forth since ancient times. If we wish to enter this gate, do not abide in intellectual understanding. And that, of course, is a rephrasing of section 1. So that's my outline of the text. And
Very helpful, thank you.
oh, you're welcome. But you can make your own outline. Okay. Because, I don't want to pin this text down. It's a magical text. And so I want to talk about some of its power. One thing is this tone of exhortation. It's not in every section, but in many of the sections, there's this exhortation. You must practice. You must practice. This is the most important thing you can do. When you're sitting a 3-week or 4-week or 90-day retreat on your own, and your mind starts fading, and you're wondering why you're there, and you pick up this text, and you go, oh, right, that's why I'm there. So this tone of exhortation, of the importance of what we're doing, that is one of the really remarkable things about this text. That it's not abstract language. That he brings up very, very vivid imagery, much of which is classic, and I'm sure none of it is entirely his. But he brings up these really strong images. The mosquito biting through an iron ball, right? The hen, sitting on her eggs. I mean, these are, and then, all those demons and all these terrible things that can happen to you if you die without, practicing. I mean, this is just, I think it's wonderful. We don't do that. Our society is too polite. And, if any of us tried to do that, people said, they'd run away. But this is wonderful. So this is something that really inspires me. The other thing is the way he keeps turning back to the absolute, that things are empty of intrinsic existence. This one mind, this origin, that, he keeps coming back to that. Even, he even has a section somewhere on how to use the outhouse and remember to wash your hands. um, you know, so he gets down to these very sort of nitty-gritty details and correct behavior and stuff like that, but he always constantly brings it back. He brings it back. He brings it back. He doesn't get lost in it. And he continually makes it clear that the absolute and relative are not separate. That the relative is the expression of the absolute. It's the instantiation of the absolute. The absolute is the source of the relative. So without putting it in those words exactly, he's constantly bringing you back to this. There's a very fundamental, as he meant it to be, there's a fundamental nature in this text. You always have the sense that you are being shown something that is essential and fundamental. And it's not trivial, and it's not a sidetrack, and it's not someone just being clever, and it's not an argument. It is just showing you. That's my response to this text, and that's why I love it so much. I really, it's so great to have an excuse to read it again. It was just fabulous. So, any other questions?
On with the same thing.
Yeah.
So you said that, anyway, I thought I heard you say that called the mere fantasies,
Yeah,
or
phantoms.
mere phantoms,
Yeah.
and that was a compliment. How
Yeah.
is being a mere phantom a compliment?
It's pointing to your original nature. It's not getting stuck. It's not getting stuck on the persona of Lin-Chi or the persona of Deshan. Okay? Anything else? Yes, Nick. Nick, I can't hear you.
Yes, so I noticed in the last section on 86, you
Uh-huh.
mentioned like the creeping phase of the first chapter are chopped off with a single phrase. We begin and end with this one understanding. I mean, is this text supposed to be almost circular?
Wait, your sound is not that clear. Could you speak a little louder and a little more slowly?
Yes. So in the last section,
Mm-hmm.
86,
Mm-hmm.
one line stood out to me. It was, so we begin and end with this one understanding, or
Mm-hmm.
actually it says, this creeping veins of the first chapter are chopped off with a single phrase. So we begin and end with this one understanding. Is
Mm-hmm.
this supposed to be like considered almost like circular, like almost like
Yes.
a
Yes.
Zen circle almost?
Oh, I wouldn't say Zen circle necessarily. I could be wrong, but that's not what comes to my mind. It's more that he's coming back pointing to the one thing. And this I should say something about the creeping vines of the first chapter are all chopped off with a single phrase. This is referring to, so creeping vines, entangling vines, that's a very common metaphor. And in this place, what it's referring to, the minute you speak, then ideas start arising and opinions start arising like vines, So those are the creeping vines. He said there's only one thing from the very beginning, et cetera, et cetera. It cannot be described or given a name. And immediately people start thinking, oh, what is this one thing? Oh, and then they start having opinions. They start arguing. They start getting into like different schools of thought about the one thing, right? Those are the creeping vines. And he's saying, cut that off. Don't do that. Okay? Just what are we pointing to? Okay? So thank you. Good.
Thank you.
Anything else? Yes, Carrie.
So you said you read this over and over when you've done solo retreats. Can you give us some anecdotes of how it's helped you?
I already did. It reminds me how serious this practice is, how important it is, you know, and it's always coming back, even if it's telling you how to go to the outhouse, it's always pointing you back to the essence, to the origin. It's always pointing you back to that. You know, I haven't talked about don't know, but it's pointing to don't know. He often talks about not knowing. That's in there also. And so it's pointing you to that. It's reminding you of what you're doing. Okay?
Okay, I'll have to read it.
I will tell you a demon story though, which
Okay.
about half the people here have heard because I always tell this story on myself. I was sitting a retreat. This was fairly early on. I was sitting a solo retreat, and suddenly I had the sensation that a demon was inhabiting me, and that it was looking out through my eyes, that it somehow taken over me and was looking out through my eyes. And it was a very terrifying feeling. And I remember thinking, you know, if I wake up tomorrow and this demon is still there, I'm checking myself into a, you know, psych hospital. But I knew that whether it's a solo retreat or a group retreat, the most important thing is keep the schedule. So I was going to keep the schedule no matter what. So I'm sitting, walking, sitting, and then I'm doing walking meditation. I'm walking on a porch outside. And as I'm walking, you know, when you walk, like what you're looking at changes because you're walking, you're moving, you're looking there, you're looking there, you're looking there, you're looking there, right? So all of a sudden, I saw that nothing looks out through my eyes, the universe comes in through my eyes. And the demon vanished. I was able to finish the retreat. So that's my demon story. Okay?
Yep.
So. Anything else?
Judy, would you be willing to share your outline with us?
No, actually, I'm not.
Okay, that's fine.
Because I don't think it's that helpful.
All right.
I think it's better to, you know, I have an outline. Jorgensen has an outline. I forget if Mueller has an outline. There's no point. The real
Okay.
point is to engage with the text.
Okay.
That's really the point.
Maybe I'll do what Nick did and print it out and make my own outline.
There you go. You can do that. Yeah. Right. Anything else? Yeah.
So I hear you talking about, you know, this great importance and knowing about what we're doing and coming back to the essence or coming back to the origin. And I guess I also have trouble with, but even if we have diluted thoughts or things arising, how is that not our essence also?
It is. Don't be attached. Okay, everything comes from this absolute. Everything comes from our original nature. Everything comes from one mind, whatever you want to call it. Everything comes from that. But don't be attached to it. That's the point. You know, the relative
Everything comes from it, but don't.
Yeah, the relative is the expression of the absolute. But if you try to hold on to something, you try to freeze it, that never works. Okay? Then you're no longer open. Then you're no longer letting the universe in. Okay? Then you have a screen between you and this universe. Okay?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Anything, I mean, he still talks about how to behave in the outhouse, right? He talks about washing hands, and I'm wondering, they didn't have running water. How did they do that? You know? Any other questions or comments? Well, thank you all. And I hope I have encouraged you to read this text over and over again and to sit many retreats.
Very much so. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you,
Oh,
Judy.
and let me remind people that we do have a 5-day retreat coming up, but in person only, if you can do it.